And now to get us more details, joining us live from London is Jane Kinnan-Moore. She's the Chief Executive Officer at the United Nations Association UK. Thank you so much, Jane, for joining us on the broadcast.
Good to see you.
Jane, well, Trump administration is facing scrutiny over its shifting rationales on a decision to attack Iran. And there seems to be a lot of confusion and frustration. Now, the conflict has entered its fifth day. What's your assessment as to what is the primary driver here?
So the Trump administration has kept its options quite open with Iran from the outset, and they've gone into this war saying a number of different things, which, as you say, are sometimes contradictory, because it hasn't been taken to the Congress, it hasn't been taken to the United Nations. They haven't had that kind of forensic, argument-based need to make the case, so they're just making the case in front of the media, and quite often it's the president having direct calls with journalists and giving these rationales. But they did issue an official list of objectives yesterday, and it was quite notable that that didn't include regime change, although officials, including the president, have been talking about regime change. Instead, it focused on Iran's nuclear program, on its missiles, and wider points about its behaviour in the region. Now, there may be a difference opening up between the US and Israel here, because Israel definitely is looking to topple the Iranian political system, whereas it seems that the US is indicating that it would consider a Venezuela-style deal with the remaining people in the Iranian regime. Regime change is, of course, illegal. It's also pretty complex and would take longer. And probably the US doesn't have the same appetite for a prolonged war that Israel seems to have.
Well, despite the ambiguity, regime change seems to be that one, of course, objective which has been unequivocally been carried out with the Supreme Leader assassinated. Now, Prime Minister Starmer had claimed that it does not believe in regime change from the skies, and he had defended his decision not to allow the US to use British bases for the initial wave of attacks. And the Prime Minister has since agreed to give US that access for defensive strikes. But now, as the conflict spills over into other regions, what does it tell us about the diplomatic tightrope that allies have to tread and the implications for the region's changing political dynamics?
Well, wars absolutely take on their own dynamics that those that start them cannot control. Now, the UK clearly took the decision, which I believe is correct, that this war is illegal, and also I'm sure that they calculated that the British public wouldn't be keen to be involved in it, because there is still a lot of regret for the invasion of Iraq back in 2003 and a sense that that was a major strategic error. So the UK took the decision not to be at all involved in the offensive. But of course, it has become more complicated, especially because Iran has also done something that violates international law in this war, which is that it has struck against its neighbours in the Gulf. Now, initially it said it was striking against the US bases there as retaliation against an aggressor, but it's clearly gone much further. They're trying to disrupt the Gulf economies and basically frighten the Gulf in the hope that that will push the Gulf to push Trump to stop the war. So the UK, along with a number of other countries like France, has defence agreements with Gulf states, and it needs to go in and help them. And then you have also seen drones being fired towards British and French bases, the British one in Cyprus and the French one in Abu Dhabi. So you can already see this war escalating and sucking other people in. There's been a lot of speculation over the last 24 hours about whether the Gulf states themselves might strike targets within Iran, which is another further risky development.
Right, and when wars and conflicts move faster than diplomacy, there's miscalculation which becomes the greatest threat. And having said that, does the US believe that overwhelming force can weaken or even reshape the Iranian regime without triggering long-term chaos? Because we've seen before that removing a regime is one thing and stabilizing what comes next is completely another. And Iran is not Iraq. It is much larger, it's more populous, and also deeply multi-ethnic. And if instability takes hold, could the fallout rival the prolonged civil wars that we have perhaps seen in Syria and in Iraq, as you mentioned?
I mean, this is a real worry because at the end of the day, the US is quite far away from the Middle East. And it may be that the people making these decisions don't actually understand or care that much if there is chaos to follow, as long as it's not directly affecting them and they don't have boots on the ground. At the end of the day, this is why it usually is better if peace and security decisions involve the people directly concerned and the neighbouring states who need to live with the consequences. Now, there have been very concerning reports emerging over the past 24 to 48 hours that one option that the US may be considering could be to arm different opposition groups in different regions of the country, possibly including Kurdish groups. And, that is obviously a big worry to a number of Iran's neighbours, including Turkey, because the prospect of kind of ethnic violence in Iran could clearly spill over to other parts of the Middle East in ways that, again, the people who start this wouldn't be able to control.
Absolutely. And if this conflict drags on, oil prices would spike, security risks will increase, and there's also no quick resolution in sight right now. The political blowback in the US could be significant. Now, how does the president sell this to a skeptical American public, especially a base that's largely opposed to open-ended wars?
Well, firstly, on the oil price, that is very interesting that oil prices are already up because tankers that normally transit the Strait of Hormuz are now avoiding the area because they can't get insurance because of the unpredictability of this war. So Trump has said yesterday that the US will underwrite insurance for tankers and that its navy may also start to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. So that is already two new forms of involvement, which I don't think were predicted just a few days ago by the US when it started this. Now, clearly, especially the younger so-called MAGA support base of Donald Trump voted for a president who said that he was going to be a peace president. He went to the Middle East just last May and he talked about not having wars in the region and focusing on peace and prosperity. So certainly there are people at home who don't want to see this happen. And there has been a lot of controversy also about how involved Israel has been in the US's decision-making, because at one point it appeared that Marco Rubio was suggesting that a big reason to go into the war was to protect Israel. But the electoral calculations around that are changing in the US because we are now seeing that public opinion in the US has shifted away from Israel, especially among younger under 40 voters. So the old assumptions of American foreign policy are changing. And in some ways, this is quite a conventional foreign policy from a president who says he's very unconventional. He's had a much higher risk appetite to confront Iran than previous presidents have had. But at the end of the day, we're seeing, an American military intervention yet again in the Middle East, focused on air power, and it sounds a lot like this is a movie we've seen before, so it may well be something that's counterproductive for him at home. Now, the Iranians, they are trying whatever they can to get the US out, and they will also be mindful of US public opinion. They'll be trying to do things that might affect US public opinion, including through trying to influence the oil price.
Right, and the variables are still shifting, and of course we'll have to watch carefully to see how both sides, of course, calibrate their next moves. But for now, thank you so much, Jane, for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective with us. Always a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.